Welcome to Mastering Your Financial Life, hosted by Judy Heft, the founder and CEO of Judith Heft and Associates, Financial and Lifestyle Concierge. This year, she's celebrating 27 years in business. In every episode, Judy interviews professionals who help others successfully manage their financial lives. You can find this show on YouTube, LinkedIn, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, and more. Judy is the author of 2 books, How to Be Smart, Successful, and Organized with Your Money for a Better Today and Tomorrow, and her latest book, Mastering Your Financial Life Cycles, How to Successfully Manage Money in Every Decade of Life. You can read chapters of her books and catch prior episodes of the show at www.judithheft.com. Now, here's the host of Mastering Your Financial Life, Judy Heft.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to episode 94 of Mastering Your Financial Life. And today I'm really thrilled to be here with Howard Koh. Howard he calls himself the guardian of real estate rights. I love that tagline. And he has over 30 years as a professional in real estate, 24 years with his firm. The name of it is, let me get that correct. I don't want to mess that up. I'm so sorry. Where are we? Procasser Rose, is that how you pronounce it, Howard?
That was for many years ago. Currently, I'm with a law firm called Meister Seelig Fein. We're here in New York City, although we have offices in Connecticut, New Jersey, and Los Angeles. And I'm delighted to be here with you, Judy.
Oh, thank you. And so I also want to say that Howard is a dynamic real estate litigator, and he represents businesses across a broad spectrum of complex legal issues. He litigates aggressively, negotiates tirelessly, and advises thoughtlessly. So I'm really thrilled to have Howard with me today. Thank you, Howard. Thanks for being our guest.
It's great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so there's a lot of different things about real estate that I don't really know, and hopefully our listeners are going to learn something. I know I will. So what happens in a typical New York City commercial landlord-tenant dispute about rent? So what happens if someone doesn't pay their rent? Can they get evicted? How long does that all take?
The answer is you will be evicted ultimately if you don't pay the rent. There are, if you are a tenant, a number of statutory protections, particularly if you are a residential tenant. If you are an owner, you probably, or at least you should, be owning that in what we've referred to as a single purpose entity, which is an LLC, which means that it is ring fenced from liability in case you have a trip and fall or something like that. But generally, the process, I tell people that it's going to take 4 to 6 months in Manhattan to evict somebody. In the outer boroughs, some of them may be longer, like the Bronx, Staten Island, it is shorter. And of course, if you're in the downstate counties, Long Island, or the lower Westchester, Rockland kind of thing, it's faster.
So why is that? Why does it vary? Does it depend on the court backup, on how many evictions and things there are, how many issues?
That's exactly what it depends on. If you look out your window, and if you're sitting in Manhattan, you'll see a lot of tenants. And the nature of the socioeconomic groups is that it's going to be taking longer where there are more people. And where the environment is generally more tenant friendly. The cold hard facts are that in Long Island, Westchester, Rockland, you don't have as many tenants, and you have a population that elects or selects judges, which is less tenant friendly and can move the cases more quickly.
Oh, that's interesting. It makes sense, I get too. So, we're just still coming off the COVID-19 pandemic. I think everybody's still walking around with masks and feel like it's going to last us forever. It's never going to leave. But so how did that affect the landlord-tenant relationship? I know that there was a time when rents were really low for a while, and then they were giving lots of free months rent, but that seems to have all changed. Now the rents are sky high again. So how did the pandemic
Well,
affect it?
the answer is that COVID had a dramatic effect on landlord-tenant relations, both residential and business. And in my legal practice, I represent a lot more businesses in landlord-tenant disputes than I do in residential. But the courts were shut down for a period. There was a period where even where some courts were open, landlord tenant courts were not open, and that created a backup. And in cases where tenants were not paying rent and you couldn't gain access to the landlord tenant courts, that often slowed things down. Uh, at the end of the day, most tenants are going to be obligated to pay their rent, even if they suffered during COVID. Hopefully, if it was a business, they were able to take advantage of PPP money. But ultimately, the way the leases are written is COVID is not an excuse for defaulting on your rent if you are a business. And if you're a resident, you are still living there and using the property. So that created, you had to pay the rent. However, if you couldn't pay the rent, you don't get thrown in jail anymore. We don't have debtor's prison. But there may be financial consequences to do that. But now that the courts are open, eventually things are getting cleaned up. Judges are under enormous pressure from the judicial administrative authorities to get these cases settled, and the vast majority of them do settle. As far as pricing, the days of the COVID pricing are long gone. What happened was that we came out of COVID and the economy, with all the government money running through it, started to heat up. And we've all heard about inflation and increased borrowing rates. The effect of the increased borrowing rates meant that there was a drop in people who were upgrading their lifestyle, getting rid of their rental apartment, and moving toward the suburbs. For a while, that was very popular, but when rates got too high, people wanted to stay put. That meant more tenants. The law of supply and demand kicked in, and rents are now higher. I've just noticed that residential rents are beginning to flatten since the interest rates have started to come down.
Oh, that's great news. That's good to know.
Right.
I'm sure our listeners that are renting here in the city will be very happy to hear that. So what about commercial? You do a lot of commercial business too, a lot of litigation and deals with, commercial buildings. So what happens if someone hasn't paid their rent in as a commercial tenant, and, is there a foreclosure? How does that all work?
Well, foreclosure means that a lender, usually a bank who holds your mortgage, isn't getting paid. And then you get foreclosed upon, which ultimately means once it's successful, the lender takes over the property or sells it at auction. For a commercial tenant that's not paying rent, it's the same thing. You go through the litigation process, and ultimately that tenant will be evicted. The challenge that owners of property always face is what happens when I get the tenant out. Most tenants, if they're well counseled in a business, don't rent in their individual names. They rent in the name of a entity like a corporation or LLC. So if you're operating the restaurant and it's My Restaurant Inc. or My Restaurant LLC, and that business fails, the landlord is not going to be able to recover any money, because once again, you can't shake the corporate seal up and down and collect all the pennies that fall out of it. If there's no money, there's no money. So the landlord is going to have to make the decision whether he thinks he can re-rent at a better rate or if he wants to work with the tenant.
Yeah, so that's why, there's so much of this going on, why they need somebody like you to help them. And how do you advise people? What if someone comes to you and they say, you know what, I just can't afford to pay my rent anymore. I'm out of work or I have health issues. How do you advise them about that?
Well, that's really tough. If that's the case, then what I would say is, if you're a residential tenant, you have the right to essentially. This is under recently passed statute since 2019. You have the right to essentially ask the landlord to try to re-rent it and mitigate the landlord's damages. So somebody else will come into your apartment, presumably it can be rented, and there's going to be a mathematical calculation, which is the difference between what the landlord would have earned had you stayed and honored your lease, and what the landlord is going to get with the new lease. So you should either try to sublet yourself, tender the apartment back to the landlord, and you have to do that in a specific way, so that the landlord has the opportunity to re-rent, and then you're going to have to leave. Now, if you want to stay in that apartment and aren't able to pay the rent, a decent landlord tenant lawyer can stretch that out for several months. And ultimately, if you have no assets to recover from, that landlord isn't going to be able to take what you don't have. That will be a black mark on your credit reports. And if you're in that situation, the other thing, of course, to consider is for filing for bankruptcy.
That's probably the last resort. People don't want to
That
have to do that unless they have to.
most people don't like to do that. There are cases where it was appropriate. I was
Mhm.
involved in a case at one point. I was actually representing the landlord, but there was a situation where bankruptcy made sense for that tenant. That tenant, in fact, filed for bankruptcy. The landlord did well, but they weren't 100% made whole.
Well, as long as they got something, I guess something's better than nothing, right?
Well, when a client comes to me, there is often a limit as to what can be accomplished.
Right.
I would love to be able to tell clients that, the good news is that even though your expectations aren't the same, you're going to recover everything, including your legal fees. Unfortunately, that is in fact rare. By the time somebody gets to see me, there are often problems, and I regard it as my job to advise my clients as best I can so that they can get out of the bad situation with as minimal damage as possible.
That makes great sense. So let's take a little break now. We're here with Howard Koh. We'll take a little commercial break and then we'll come back and talk to Howard some more.
Hey there. I just want to tell you a little bit about my new book that just came out called Mastering Your Financial Life Cycles. And here it is. It's how to successfully manage your money in every decade of life. I co-authored this with my CFO, Liz Levy. And together we created this manual that's going to help you through every stage of life. We talk about having a baby. We talk about young adulthood, pre-retirement, what to do when you're at that age of retirement. If you're contemplating divorce, do you need an estate plan? We cover all of these, each subject in a different chapter. And I really think that you're going to find this so helpful because at the end of every chapter, we have checklists that you can look at and you can use, and they can be a guide for you. So this is a wonderful manual that we've created. It's available on Amazon. You can also find it on our website at judithheft.com/book. And we're here for you. If you need anything, reach out. I hope you enjoy the book. Here's another picture of it, just so you know what's going on. Here it is. And I'm really proud of it. It's my second book. And I'd love to have you read it and give me your feedback. Judy Heft, judithheft.com, financial and lifestyle concierge, celebrating 26 years in business. And over the years, I've learned so much. And what I've been trying to do is impart a little bit of this knowledge to you so I can help all of you become as financially organized as I am.
And hello, everybody. We're back. We're back here with Howard Koh. Howard is with Meister Seelig Fein here in New York City. So, Howard, I've heard this term and I have no idea what it means, mezzanine debt. What does it mean, and what happens if the lender's not paid? Can you explain that, please?
Sure. Let's talk about what mezzanine debt is first. If you are a homeowner, you probably didn't buy that home entirely with cash. You took out a mortgage to do that. Mezzanine debt is a construct in the commercial real estate world. So most people, like who have buildings that they rent to business or multifamily buildings, uh, buy those buildings with a mortgage, but they also need other financing. Back in the day, the way to get additional financing was to find somebody who would give you a second mortgage. But it turns out that in New York State and many other states, you have to pay a mortgage recording tax if you put on a first mortgage or a second mortgage. Mezzanine debt is a device to avoid mortgage recording tax. It allows you to have the lender to have a secured interest, not in the bricks and sticks and dirt that makes up your building, but in the company that owns the building and the ground. So that's what mezzanine debt is. It's a security interest not in the real property, but in the ownership interest of the company. So if you don't pay your mezzanine lenders, like all lenders, they get upset and they have the right to start a mezzanine foreclosure. Mezzanine foreclosures, sometimes called strict foreclosures, are very different than your traditional mortgage foreclosure in New York. In a traditional mortgage foreclosure in New York, there are a number of notifications that the landlord has to go through to let any tenants know that there's a foreclosure going to be happening, to make sure that they have demonstrated that they have the right to foreclose, mainly that they own the note and the underlying mortgage. And that process in Manhattan will take you at least a year. Although sometimes it can take much longer. In mezzanine debt, that is a private action to foreclose. You do not need to involve the court system at all. What you do is you schedule an auction of the ownership interest that you have the lien on. And people can come and bid. The person who owns the lien has the right to what we call credit bid, which means bid in dollar amounts up to the total amount of their debt without having to part to any cash. And those can be done in 30 to 60 days. The only restriction that you see on a mezzanine foreclosure is it has to be reasonable. Typically, on the litigation side, the party who is being foreclosed against will run to court and say that the terms of the auction are unreasonable, and a judge will decide that. But mezzanine foreclosures happen much faster. What you get at the day, if you are the winning bidder in a mezzanine foreclosure, is you own the property through your entity, subject to the first mortgage. So you still have to be able to pay that first mortgage debt, or else that lender who is not going to get paid is going to exercise its rights.
That's really good to know. So who knew that? I didn't. I never knew what a mezzanine debt was. I learned something new today. So thank you for that.
If you walk through Manhattan, I would say that well over half, maybe probably well over 75% of the buildings you see have some kind of mezzanine debt. Financing can get very creative. In Stuyvesant Town, which is probably the largest mortgage foreclosure in the history of the United States, back in 2008, roughly, when Tishman Speyer lost control of that property, that had at least 10 different levels of mezzanine debt. So investors were, the loan had been securitized, and investors were buying all kinds of risk level in that debt.
So, I think that we talked about, or maybe we didn't, but I think, commercial real estate is decreasing in value. It seems like that. And, with the mortgage rates and the interest rates and everything. So how is that affecting the owners or the lenders and the tenants? How does that, and I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, that there must be a lot of empty office space here in Manhattan because of the pandemic. A lot of people moved out. And I know, for instance, at one of the offices, that are the offices that are hybrid, people are going in like 2 days a week. There's hardly anybody there. So they're downsizing and taking smaller spaces. So how is that all working?
It is very interesting times. That old Chinese curse, may you live in interesting times. It's important to think about what segment of the market we're talking about. For instance, multifamily has held up pretty well. People still need to live in apartment buildings in New York City, even though there's a little bit of a pandemic. The population, I think, is holding steady. But there are people who are leaving, but you're also getting people coming in. So multifamily is doing okay. Retail is doing okay. Although retail had been struggling long before the pandemic with the advent of Amazon. You just don't need to buy basic commodities like toothpaste or frankly even groceries with the advent of delivery services the way you did in the past. But retail is still holding up pretty well. People still need hair salons, they need gyms, they need restaurants to go to. The sector that has been hit the hardest is the office building sector. And you're right, the work from home has seriously upset the balance there. And it's become a bigger problem for something called, what I recently just heard this term, the maturity wall. Unlike your typical homeowner situation, if you've bought an office building, and frankly, it's usually not individuals, although occasionally it is. It's usually real estate investment trusts and companies go out and buy an office building. You don't typically buy that with a 30-year fully amortizing mortgage. You buy that with a 5, 7, or 10-year mortgage, which is ultimately not amortizing, with the idea that the property was going to rise in value, as it seemed to do for a long time before we got to the pandemic. And when the note matured and it was time to pay off the entire balance of your $80 million mortgage, because it may have cost you that much money to buy the building, you are going to be able to refinance with no problem. With values not the same, people are all upside down on their loan. And now the problem is that you can't get refinancing. So that's created a real problem. You've got a lot of mortgages going into default. And at the beginning, I thought we were going to see a lot of these cases end up into foreclosures as lenders were going to rush to get the property back. And then I thought some more on it and started to watch what was happening. And as it turns out, the lenders aren't so keen to take back those buildings for two reasons. First, they can't operate them any better, really, than the people who already owned it. The market is what the market is. And the second thing is, accounting folks will understand this. If they take over that property, they're going to have to take a write down on their books, and they don't want to see that write down. Mm-hmm. So what's happening is that you're getting a lot of people negotiating extensions, lenders working with borrowers, trying to work out the best deal. Our borrower is going to have to give up some equity, probably will, in order to get to the lenders to the table. But what's going to happen is people are going to muddle along until the market resets and people start to figure out what's going to do. Now, the big hope, and the New York City has proposed this with the Adams administration City of Yes, and you've got some tax programs in Albany, is to try to convert all of these empty office buildings into new apartments to solve the housing crisis. Those of us in the industry who follow this are a little dubious. It's not easy to change an office building into an apartment building. You have to replumb the entire building because you need a toilet in every apartment instead of 10 on a floor in one place. And you need to put windows in every bedroom. That's, by the way, under New York City building codes. So it's very expensive to build these things out. And as they say in the real estate development industry, these deals just don't pencil yet most of the time, particularly in Midtown Manhattan, where you have enormous floor plates. I am hopeful that eventually there will be enough tax incentives and enough regulatory loosening that it will be easier to convert some of these assets. But I think that's a real challenge for the government and the private sector working together to figure out how that's going to happen, because the reality is people are working in a different way than they were 5 years ago.
It's interesting. So we're going to have to see what happens with that, how it all comes down, and things are changing now.
That's right.
Interesting to watch.
Right. If you have cash to invest, now might be an interesting time. There are people who, if they want to invest in real estate and are patient enough, I think that there are opportunities coming online. But don't take advice from me. I give legal advice, not business advice. But it could be.
That's great to know, Howard. So thank you for being such a great guest. This was really interesting. How can our listeners find you?
Well, the best way to find me is to Google me, Howard Koh, K-O-H. Meister Seelig Fein is my law firm. That has all of my contact information. I'm also active on LinkedIn. If you want to reach out and make a connection, those are the best ways to find me. I'm always happy to talk to people who have, problems in real estate or general problems in business and are looking for some advice. If I'm not the right lawyer for you, and I think everybody should have their lawyer, then I can certainly help you find somebody who can help you.
Well, thank you so much, Howard. Thanks for being a great guest.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you for tuning into Mastering Your Financial Life, hosted by Judy Heft. You can read chapters of her books and catch prior episodes of the show at www.judithheft.com. Thank you for your positive comments and sharing this show with others.